There's an aphorism within cognitive science, particularly those aspects of cognitive science which has to do with embodied cognition, which basically says that the mind is embodied and the body is embedded, which means that the mind is completely supervenient on, contingent upon the physical status of the human body. We're talking about human minds, which we are, and that body is again completely embedded within, engaged with, locked into the affordances and opportunities provided by the physical environment. So the mind is embodied and the body is embedded. But I'm trying to unpick that for myself to try and understand it a bit better in relation to something I'm working on the other channel. And it's to do with, well, it's to do with mind and brain, I suppose. It's not that I don't understand the aphorism, I just don't think I understand it enough. So I'm just going to try and work some variants on that. And the variant that I've just been kicking around as I've been walking my dogs is to do with, what if we weren't talking about minds? What if we're talking about some other part of the being of human? And I've been thinking about stomachs, actually. Stomachs. Would it make sense to say that the stomach is embedded, I beg your pardon, the stomach is embodied and the body is embedded? Now to me that makes a great deal of sense, very simple sense too. I can kind of get underneath that in a more coherent way at least. What that would mean to say that the stomach is embodied and the body is embedded is that here we are as bodies, if I can just start from that level of organisation, here we are as bodies in a natural environment, and here it is, this natural environment has the means for us to the potential at least to provide us with nourishment and nutrients. There are things out there, there are proteins, there are carbohydrates, there's fibre, there's all the things that this metabolic machinery that I've identified with, all of the stuff is out there in the shape of the cows and sheep that I pass when I walk through these fields, or the plants that are growing in the fields or in the trees around me. So my body is embedded within an environment in which it has a very particular kind of strongly engaged relationship, and that particular relationship is one of nourishment, but there are others of course. That's great. Now the stomach is embedded because, I beg your pardon, I'm getting this mixed up. The stomach is embodied because the stomach provides part of the mechanisms for the body to achieve that access to those nutrients. So when those other parts of my biological machinery, my teeth and my gullet and my what's it called, epiglottis and whatever the bit that leads down to my stomach is called, my digestive tract, when all that's doing its job properly, at a certain point my stomach, my embodied stomach, will be called upon to do some particular things. All this unprocessed stuff will come down into my stomach. All these pieces of meat, well, it would be pieces of meat, I'm a vegetarian, but it could be pieces of meat, or nut cutlets, or carrot cake, or some piece of the world comes into that area, and the various things that go on in my stomach, the various enzymatic reactions, which if I remember my high school biology correctly is pepsin, trypsin, and amylopsid, and hydrochloric acid, they get to work on that stuff, and I begin the process of breaking it down into simpler chemicals that can be absorbed by my body and used. So in terms of the role of the stomach as a piece of embodiment, one of its purposes is to turn the stuff of the world into the stuff of me. It turns the raw materials of the world, of physical matter of the world, into the physical matter of my muscles and bones and sinews and tissues and so on. Okay. So I think I've got that. So let me just replay that in terms of, not the mind, I don't want to go to mind yet, I want to go to brain really. So let me just play it again across brain. So the brain is embodied and the body is embedded. Okay, there's a similar kind of logic there, I think, to stomach. Here I am in the world, a body in the world, with all of the mobility that bodies have, of the various sensory awarenesses that bodies have, and the sensory organs, which I'm taking for granted at this moment, because that's the point in the narrative I'm starting. But all of this sort of sensory apparatus I've got, which is locking me in and kind of providing a kind of dovetail joint between myself and the world. And then there's the brain, which is taking all that sensory data and doing various things with it. And I don't know what those things are. There's lots of different models for what those procedures might be, but various processing takes place. In the stomach that's called digestion, but it's not called that in the brain. But something is happening. I think there are parallels, certainly to the extent that the stomach takes the stuff of the world and turns it into the stuff of my physical body. I think it's not beyond the bounds of possibility to say that the brain takes the stuff of the world in terms of sensory experience and turns it into the stuff of thought, as Pinker might say. And if we don't call that digestion, we call it thinking, I suppose. We might call it thinking. I know thinking has got overtones of consciousness which aren't necessarily required for what I'm talking about here. But the stuff of cognition. I think the process is cognition rather than digestion, and it's the mechanisms by which the stuff of the sensorially accessed world is turned into the stuff of thought. Okay, I think that's what brains do, and we call that. Actually, I think we call that mind or minding. I would prefer to think of it as minding rather than mind. It's a process, just the way that digestion is a process. So the brain is embodied as the body is embedded. And the thing the brain does is minding the gap, minding the store, minding its own business. I think the implication of that is that different brains, embodied in different bodies, but embedded in the same environment, would operate differently. They'd all presumably do something similar. They'd all do something that you might call cognition. I'm sure a cow's brain is doing something called cognition in the same way that my brain is doing something called cognition. But just as a cow's stomach is doing something different to my stomach, a cow has 5 stomachs, I believe. So just as a cow has a different digestive process, which would probably be completely different, so I think our cognitive process, even though it's using the same mechanisms, would be different. Human cognition we call minding. I'm not sure what you call bovine cognition. I'm talking about cows because there's a whole flock of them. Is it flock, herd, crowd? Anyway, there's a whole bunch of them on the hill over there. Frisians and Holsteins. Okay, that's where I'm going to leave that thing. So where I've got to with that, I'm thinking, is that as the stomach is embodied and the body is embedded, so the brain is embodied and the body is embedded. As the stomach's function within that embodiment and embeddedness is digestion, so the brain's function within that embodiment and embeddedness is cognition. Different stomachs digest in different ways. Different brains cognize in different ways. Human brains cognize in a way we call minding.